I never thought of Liam as anything more than Claire's son. For years, he was just a kid running around the house during my visits, tugging at my sleeve to show me his latest drawings or asking me 1,000 questions about what it was like to be a nurse. I'd always tease him about how he'd steal cookies from the jar when he thought no one was looking, or how he couldn't sit still long enough to watch an entire movie. But people grow up, don't they? That night, everything changed. It was after one of Claire's infamous family dinners. She loved hosting everyone at her house, friends, extended family, anyone who wanted to gather around her big oak table. By the time dessert was finished, the house was filled with the smell of apple pie and the sound of laughter, the kind of warmth that made me feel less lonely. But Claire had gone to bed early, claiming she was exhausted after a long day. Most of the guests had left, and Emma, Liam's younger sister, was out with friends. That left just me and Liam, standing in the kitchen with plates stacked in the sink and half-empty wine glasses on the counter. "You don't have to stay and help," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. "It's fine," he replied, his voice deeper than I remembered. "I don't mind." I glanced over at him and paused. There was something different about the way he carried himself, the way he stood just a little taller, his shoulders broader than they used to be. He wasn't the lanky teenager I remembered. "So," I said, trying to fill the silence as I picked up a wine glass to rinse, "how's the graphic novel coming along?" He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to make my stomach flip in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. "Slowly, but it's getting there. Maybe one day I'll actually finish something worth showing people." "You're talented," I said, glancing at him. "You've got nothing to worry about." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms as his eyes lingered on me a little too long. "You've always believed in me," he said quietly. The room suddenly felt smaller. I focused on the water running over the glass in my hands, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. "Of course I do," I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone. "I've known you since you were a kid. You've always had potential." "That's the thing," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not a kid anymore." I froze, my grip tightening on the glass. "Liam, I've been in love with you for years," he said, his voice steady but filled with something raw. "I know how it sounds. I know what you're going to say. But I need you to know." My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. "Liam, you don't mean that," I said, turning to face him. "You're young. It's not a phase," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. "You've been the one constant in my life, the one person who's always understood me. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him how wrong this was, but the words caught in my throat. Because in that moment, standing there with the weight of his confession hanging between us, I couldn't deny the truth. He wasn't a boy anymore. And the way he looked at me made it impossible to ignore. I've been friends with Claire for as long as I can remember. We met in nursing school, two young women trying to balance exams, internships, and life outside the hospital. Claire was everything I wasn't: outgoing, bold, and fearless. She made friends effortlessly, knew how to charm anyone in a room, and always had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the world. Over the years, we became more like family than friends. When I didn't have plans for holidays, Claire insisted I spend them at her house. She'd cook a feast big enough to feed a small army, and I'd bring dessert, usually store-bought because baking was never my forte. And then there was Liam. I first met Liam when he was 9 years old, a scrawny kid with big brown eyes and a mop of unruly hair. He was shy at first, always hiding behind Claire's leg whenever I came over, but that didn't last long. Once he warmed up to me, there was no shutting him up. "Do you think I could be a doctor someday?" he asked me once, his eyes wide with curiosity. "You can be anything you want," I told him. He grinned, then quickly launched into 100 more questions about surgeries and hospitals, his mind buzzing with possibilities. As he got older, his interests shifted. By the time he was a teenager, he was always hunched over a sketch pad, his fingers smudged with charcoal or ink. His art was impressive, even back then, dark and brooding, with an emotional depth that seemed far beyond his years. "He's got talent," I told Claire once after she showed me one of his pieces. I just wish he'd spend less time in his room, she replied, rolling her eyes. I swear, if I didn't make him come downstairs for dinner, he'd forget other people exist. But that was Liam. Quiet, introspective, and always a little apart from everyone else. While Liam was growing up, I was busy with my own life. I'd been working as a nurse practitioner for years, a job I loved but one that left little room for much else. My last serious relationship had ended when I was in my early 40s, a mutual decision that felt more like a surrender than a breakup. We hadn't fought or fallen out of love, we just drifted apart, our lives pulling us in different directions. After that, I stopped trying. Dating felt exhausting, and I told myself I didn't need anyone. I had my work, my friends, and Claire's family, who treated me like one of their own. But deep down, there was a loneliness I didn't want to admit to. Liam had always been like a nephew to me, someone I cared about but never thought of in any romantic or inappropriate way. When he was younger, I'd tease him about his messy hair or his endless appetite, and he'd roll his eyes at me like any teenager would. But something shifted after he graduated college and moved back home. The first time I noticed it was during one of Claire's dinners. Liam was helping me set the table, his movements calm and deliberate. I asked him how his art was going, expecting the usual vague answers, but instead, he opened up in a way I hadn't anticipated. "It's harder than I thought it'd be," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Putting yourself out there, I mean. You spend so much time in your head, creating something, and then you're terrified people won't get it." I looked at him, surprised by his vulnerability. "I think people will get it," I said. "You've got something special, Liam. Don't let fear stop you from showing it." He smiled at me then, a small, almost shy smile that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't understand at the time. Over the months that followed, I started to notice little things. The way Liam's eyes lingered on me during conversations. The way he always seemed to find a reason to sit next to me at dinners or help me clean up afterward. The way he smiled when I complimented his work, like my opinion mattered more than anyone else's. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just being polite or grateful for the support. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Claire, of course, didn't notice. She was too busy managing her own life. Work, Emma's endless extracurricular activities, and her attempts to navigate the dating world after her divorce. But if she had seen the way Liam looked at me, I'm not sure she would have laughed it off as easily as I did. The turning point came one afternoon when I stopped by Claire's house to drop off a book I'd borrowed. Claire wasn't home, but Liam was, sitting on the porch with his sketchpad balanced on his knees. "Hey," I said, handing him the book. "Your mom left this at my place last week." "Thanks," he said, setting the book aside. "You want to sit for a bit?" I hesitated, but eventually sat down beside him, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. He showed me his sketchpad, flipping through pages filled with intricate drawings of people, animals, and abstract shapes. His talent was undeniable, his work raw and full of emotion. "These are incredible," I said, genuinely impressed. "Thanks," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about doing a series on people who've influenced me," he finished, his tone soft but deliberate. I smiled, looking at him. "That sounds beautiful. Do you have anyone in mind to start with?" He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the sketchpad. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost hesitant. "I was thinking about starting with you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to confront. "Me?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "Liam, come on, I'm hardly an interesting subject." "That's not true," he said, turning to face me fully now. "You've always been there. You've believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You're important to me." There was something in his eyes, a kind of intensity that made it impossible to dismiss his words as casual or innocent. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a strange mix of flattery and unease. "I'm just a family friend," I said lightly, trying to brush it off. "You're more than that," he replied, his voice firm. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I visited Claire's house, I found myself hyper-aware of Liam's presence. The way he moved, the way he looked at me, the way his voice seemed to soften whenever he spoke to me. It was subtle at first, easy enough to ignore. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to deny that something had shifted between us. I told myself it was nothing, just a harmless crush on his part, and misplaced curiosity on mine. But deep down, I knew better. The night of Claire's family dinner was the moment everything came to a head. By then, I'd spent weeks trying to push my feelings aside, convincing myself that it was all in my head. But when we were left alone in the kitchen, something in Liam's demeanor was different. He wasn't the shy, awkward boy I'd watched grow up. He was confident, self-assured, and there was a weight to his presence that made it impossible to ignore. "You've been quiet tonight," I said, breaking the silence as we washed the dishes. He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just thinking." "About what?" He set the dish towel down and turned to face me, his expression serious. "About you." My breath hitched and I felt a flicker of panic. "Liam, I know what you're going to say," he interrupted, stepping closer. "That this is wrong, that it's just a phase, that I'm too young to understand what I'm feeling. But I do understand. I've been in love with you for years, and I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this way." His words hit me like a freight train, leaving me speechless. I stared at him, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of which I could put into words. "You mean so much to me," he continued, his voice trembling slightly now, "and I know it's complicated, but I need you to know how I feel." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of the dishwasher and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Finally, I found my voice. "Liam, you're young. You don't know what you're saying." "I'm not a kid anymore," he said, cutting me off. "And you're not just my mom's friend. You're everything to me." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him how wrong this was, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just pure, unfiltered emotion. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I should have walked away. That's the thought that keeps coming back to me when I replay that night in my head. I should have set down the dish I was holding, told him this wasn't something we could talk about, and left the kitchen without another word. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, as Liam's confession settled into the space between us like a slow-burning fuse. His words weren't rushed or impulsive. They were calm, deliberate, the kind of words you don't say unless you've thought about them for a long time. "I mean it," he said, stepping closer. His eyes stayed locked on mine, unflinching. "You've been everything to me, and I can't keep pretending that's not true." "Liam?" My voice was a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," he replied, his tone steady but filled with something raw. "I've thought about it every day for years. You're the only person who's ever really seen me." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. There was no hesitation in his voice, no hint of the insecurity or uncertainty I expected from someone his age. Instead, there was conviction, an intensity that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in years. "This isn't right," I said, trying to sound firm but failing. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet but insistent. "Because of my age? Because of what people might think?" "Because I'm your mom's best friend," I said, stepping back slightly. "Because I've known you since you were a kid. It can't be." But even as I spoke, my words felt hollow. I don't remember exactly how it happened. One minute we were standing there, the tension thick enough to drown in, and the next his hand was on mine, gentle but purposeful. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice low. "If you don't feel the same way, just tell me, and I'll never bring it up again." I couldn't speak. My heart was racing, my thoughts spiraling into chaos. But I didn't pull my hand away. He stepped closer, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I just need you to know." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I saw everything he wasn't saying, years of quiet admiration, longing, and something deeper than either of us could explain. And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or forceful. It was soft, tentative, as if he was testing the waters. For a split second, I froze, every rational thought in my head screaming at me to push him away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my hands gripping the edge of the counter as his lips moved against mine. There was a heat between us, a spark that I hadn't felt in years, and it terrified me as much as it thrilled me. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my mind reeling. "We can't do this," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't care," he replied, his gaze unwavering. After that kiss, everything felt surreal. I told him he needed to leave, that we both needed time to think. But even as he walked out the door, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. I paced the kitchen for what felt like hours, my thoughts a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and something I couldn't quite name. I knew how wrong it was. I'd been friends with Claire for decades, and Liam was practically family. This wasn't just crossing a line. It was obliterating it. But there was another part of me, the part I didn't want to admit existed, that felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I told myself it was a mistake. That night, I convinced myself I'd let the moment get the best of me, that it was a one-time lapse in judgment. But when Liam texted me the next morning, my resolve crumbled. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my fingers hovering over the screen. I knew I should say no, that letting this go any further would only make things worse. But instead I typed, "Come over." When he arrived, I could see the nervous energy radiating off him. He stood on my porch, hands shoved into his pockets, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "Hi," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. "Last night," I started, but he interrupted me. "Wasn't a mistake," he said firmly. "It was," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. "Liam, you're young. This isn't what you think it is." He shook his head, leaning forward. "You keep saying that, but you don't believe it. I know you felt it too." His words left me speechless, my carefully constructed arguments crumbling under the weight of his certainty. "I don't know what this is," I admitted finally, my voice trembling, "but it's not something we can act on." "Why not?" he asked, his tone quiet but insistent. "Because it's complicated? Because people might judge us? None of that changes how I feel about you." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "What about your mom? What about Claire? Do you have any idea what this would do to her?" "I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this way anymore, and I don't think you can either." His words hung in the air, and before I could stop myself, I reached for him. I didn't know what I was doing, whether it was a moment of weakness or something deeper. But when our lips met again, all the fear and guilt melted away. This kiss wasn't tentative like the first, it was deeper, more urgent, a release of everything we'd been holding back. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself giving in to something I couldn't explain. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his, my breath shaky. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "I don't care," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm not letting you go." That night marked the beginning of something neither of us could stop. It was messy and complicated, filled with stolen moments and quiet confessions, but it was real. I knew we were walking a tightrope, that the secrets we were keeping could destroy everything. But when I was with him, none of that seemed to matter. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I wish I could say I stopped it there, that I came to my senses after that second kiss and told Liam we couldn't continue. But the truth is, I didn't want to stop. For the first time in years, I felt wanted. Not just noticed, but deeply, unflinchingly desired. It was intoxicating, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize or resist, I found myself falling deeper into something I knew I couldn't control. It was a week later when Liam and I crossed the line we could never come back from. Claire had asked me to house sit while she went on a weekend trip with Emma, and Liam stayed behind, claiming he needed time to work on his graphic novel. That Saturday night, he texted me, "Can I come over?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew what he was asking, even if he hadn't said it outright. I should have said no. Instead, I typed, "Yes." When he arrived, the air between us was electric. He stepped into the house, his presence filling the space, and I felt my pulse quicken. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice trembling. "But you let me come," he replied, his gaze steady. Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his hands sliding to my waist as he kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. His touch was confident, his lips moving against mine with a hunger that left me breathless. We didn't make it far, just to the couch in the living room. His hands were everywhere, his touch igniting something inside me that I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was wrong, knew we were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the room silent except for the sound of our breathing. "This is insane," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "But it feels right." And in that moment, I couldn't argue with him. After that night, things between us changed. We didn't talk about what we were doing or what it meant. We just let it happen, swept up in the thrill of something forbidden. Liam would come over late at night, slipping through the back door while Claire was asleep upstairs. We'd steal moments in the quiet of the kitchen, his hands on my waist as he kissed me like he couldn't get enough. Once, he pulled me into the hallway while Claire was in the next room, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "I can't stop thinking about you." "You're insane," I whispered back, even as I let him kiss me. "And you love it," he replied, his grin mischievous. He wasn't wrong. One afternoon, while Claire was at work, Liam and I met at a park on the edge of town. It was risky, but we couldn't resist the chance to spend time together without the weight of secrecy hanging over us. We found a secluded spot beneath a canopy of trees, the golden sunlight filtering through the leaves. He leaned against the trunk of a tree, pulling me close, his hands sliding to my hips as he kissed me deeply. "You're going to get us caught," I murmured, my hands resting on his chest. "Let them catch us," he replied, his voice low and rough. I laughed, shaking my head. "You're impossible." "And you're perfect," he said, his gaze softening as he looked at me. His words made my chest ache, a mix of longing and fear swirling inside me. I wanted to believe we could keep this up, that the bubble we'd created could last forever. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The boldest risk we took was during a weekend trip with Claire and Emma. We'd gone to a cabin in the mountains, a family getaway Claire had organized as a way to spend more time together. The first night, after dinner, Claire and Emma went to bed early, leaving me and Liam alone by the fire. We sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the flames filling the room. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said finally, his voice low. "Liam." I started, but he cut me off. "I mean it," he said, turning to face me. "Every time I see you, every time I'm near you, it's all I can think about." My resolve crumbled under the weight of his words. Without thinking, I leaned in, my lips finding his in a kiss that was equal parts desperate and tender. The risk of being caught only made it more exhilarating. We slipped outside, the cool night air wrapping around us as we found a secluded spot behind the cabin. His hands were on me, his touch sending shivers down my spine, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. But, for all the passion and intensity, there was always a shadow hanging over us. Every time I saw Claire, guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line I was crossing. "She's your mother's best friend," I said one night as Liam and I lay tangled together in my bed. "And you're the woman I love," he replied without hesitation. His words sent a rush of warmth through me, but they also brought a flicker of fear. This wasn't just a fling for him, it was something real, something that couldn't be easily undone. "What happens if she finds out?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She won't," he said firmly. "We'll be careful." But no matter how careful we were, I couldn't shake the feeling that our time was running out. It started with small things. Claire began to notice changes in Liam, his sudden absences, the way he seemed distracted during family dinners, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. "Is everything okay with Liam?" she asked me one evening as we sat on the porch, sipping wine. "Of course," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. "He's been acting strange lately," she said, frowning. "I don't know if it's stress or something else, but he's not himself." I felt a pang of guilt, but said nothing, knowing that any explanation I gave would only raise more questions. The closest call came one afternoon when Claire left the house to run errands. Liam and I were alone in the kitchen, and I couldn't resist the pull of his presence. "You're going to get us caught," I whispered as he kissed me, his hand sliding to my waist. "Let them," he murmured against my lips. But just as things were heating up, we heard the front door open. "Mom?" Claire called from the hallway. We sprang apart, my heart racing as I scrambled to make it look like we were doing something innocent. Liam grabbed a dish towel, pretending to dry his hands, while I busied myself with rearranging the counter. When Claire walked in, she glanced between us, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I said quickly, my voice too high. "Just cleaning up." Her gaze lingered on us for a moment before she nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Every time we were together, I told myself it would be the last time. That I'd end it before the truth came out and everything fell apart. But every time I found myself going back to him, unable to resist the pull he had on me. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before our secret was exposed. Secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how tightly you try to keep them locked away. With every glance Liam and I exchanged, every touch stolen when we thought no one was looking, the walls around our secret began to crack. I should have known it couldn't last forever. It started with Claire. "You've been acting weird," Claire said one evening as we sat on her porch, sipping wine. I froze, my hand tightening around the stem of my glass. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, her brow furrowed as she stared out into the yard. "I don't know. It's like you're distracted. And Liam's been the same way. He's out all the time, doesn't tell me where he's going. When I ask, he just says he's working on something. It feels like he's hiding something." I forced a laugh, the sound unnatural even to my own ears. "He's in his 20s, Claire. It's normal for him to want some independence." "Maybe," she said, taking another sip. "But it's not just him, it's you too. You've been distant. Like there's something you're not telling me." My stomach twisted with guilt, but I plastered on a smile. "You're imagining things," I said lightly. "I've just been busy with work." She nodded slowly, but her eyes lingered on me a moment too long, as if she didn't entirely believe me. The cracks in our secret widened during another one of Claire's family dinners. The tension between Liam and me had been growing, and no matter how much we tried to act normal, it was becoming harder to hide. Claire was busy in the kitchen when Emma, Liam's younger sister, came into the living room and plopped onto the couch beside me. "Hey," she said casually, pulling out her phone. "You and Liam have been spending a lot of time together lately." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" she shrugged, scrolling through her phone. "I don't know, it's just, I've noticed the way he looks at you. It's weird." I laughed nervously, brushing off her comment. "You're imagining things." But Emma didn't look convinced. "Maybe," she said, her tone laced with suspicion. Liam walked into the room a moment later, his eyes flicking to me before quickly looking away. Emma's gaze darted between us, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Everything okay?" Liam asked, his voice steady but cautious. "Yeah," Emma said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Just talking about how you've been acting weird lately." Liam's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving me alone with Emma's lingering suspicion. The moment everything came crashing down happened a week later. Claire had planned a small get-together at her house, inviting a few close friends and family members for a casual dinner. I had promised myself I would keep my distance from Liam, but the tension between us was palpable from the moment I arrived. Throughout the evening, I caught him stealing glances at me, his gaze lingering a second too long. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on chatting with the other guests and helping Claire in the kitchen. But the more I tried to avoid him, the more I felt drawn to him. After dinner, while Claire and the others were cleaning up, I stepped outside for some air. The cool evening breeze was a welcome relief from the heat of the crowded house. I heard the door open behind me and turned to see Liam stepping out onto the porch. "We need to stop this," I said quietly, my voice trembling. He didn't reply. Instead, he closed the distance between us, his hand brushing against mine. "I can't," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "I won't." Before I could respond, he kissed me, his lips capturing mine in a way that made my knees weak. For a moment I forgot where we were, forgot the risk, forgot everything except him. And then I heard it. The sharp intake of breath, the sound of a glass shattering on the porch. We broke apart, turning to see Claire standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. The silence that followed was deafening. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Liam stepped forward, his hands raised as if to calm her. Mom, please. Don't, she snapped, her voice shaking. Don't you dare try to explain this. Her gaze shifted to me, her eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. How could you? She asked, her voice breaking. You're my best friend. You've been like family. And this is what you've been doing behind my back. Claire, I'm sorry, I said, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't supposed to happen. I never meant to hurt you. Hurt me? She repeated, her voice rising. You've been sneaking around with my son. Do you have any idea what this means? What this could do to our family? Mom, it's not like that, Liam said, his voice firm. I love her. Claire's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. You what? I love her, he repeated, his voice steady. And she loves me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. He had never said it out loud before, and hearing the words now, in the middle of this chaos, felt both exhilarating and devastating. Claire stared at him, her face a mix of disbelief and fury. You're confused, she said finally. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Liam said, his tone unwavering. The rest of the night was a blur of shouting and tears. Claire demanded that I leave, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I can't even look at you right now, she said, her eyes burning into mine. You've destroyed everything. I tried to explain, to make her understand that this wasn't some careless fling, but she wouldn't listen. You betrayed me, she said, her voice breaking. You betrayed all of us. As I walked out the door, my heart felt like it was shattering into 1,000 pieces. That night, I sat alone in my living room, replaying everything that had happened. The weight of what I had done was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, the hurt, the betrayal, the disbelief. Liam texted me, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. I needed time to think, to process everything that had just unfolded. I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt like living in the aftermath of a storm. Everything was quieter, but the damage was impossible to ignore. Claire didn't call, didn't text, and I didn't dare reach out to her. I stayed in my house, replaying the events of that night over and over again, wondering if there had been a way to stop it before it all spiraled out of control. But the truth was, once Liam and I crossed that line, there was no way to undo the inevitable. Liam called me every day, leaving messages when I didn't answer. Please talk to me, he said in one of them, his voice strained. I can't just let this end like this. I need to know you're okay. I wasn't okay, and I didn't know how to tell him that. I finally answered one of his calls a week later, my voice shaking as I said, Liam, I can't do this right now. Can't do what? He asked, his voice softer now. Any of it, I said, tears threatening to spill. Claire hates me. Emma probably hates me. And you've lost your relationship with your mom because of me. That's not your fault, he said firmly. I made my own choices. But I should have stopped this before it got to this point, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't, and now everything is ruined. There was a long pause before he spoke again. Do you regret us? He asked quietly. The question hit me harder than I expected. Did I regret it? The passion, the connection, the way he made me feel alive? No, but I couldn't ignore the cost. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire's silence was the hardest part. For decades, she had been my closest friend, my confidant, the person I could always rely on. Now I felt like I was mourning the loss of a piece of myself. I tried writing her a letter, pouring out everything I couldn't say in person. How sorry I was, how much I valued her, how I never meant to hurt her. But when it came time to mail it, I couldn't. It felt selfish, like trying to absolve myself of guilt that wasn't mine to forgive. Weeks turned into months, and though I saw Claire occasionally at community events or in passing at the grocery store, we didn't speak. She avoided my gaze, and I didn't have the courage to approach her. Emma, like her mother, kept her distance. She didn't know all the details, but she knew enough to look at me with a mix of confusion and disappointment. Chloe was even colder. Her anger at Liam had only grown after Claire found out, and she refused to speak to him at all. Liam told me about their strained conversations, how Chloe would leave the room whenever he tried to explain himself, how Claire had barely said more than a few words to him in weeks. She won't even look at me, he said one night over the phone. I don't know how to fix it. Neither did I. Eventually, Liam and I started to drift apart. It wasn't a conscious decision. There were no dramatic breakups or tearful goodbyes. But the weight of what had happened, of what we had done, began to suffocate whatever it was we had shared. We stopped texting as much. The late-night calls became less frequent. And then one day, he didn't call at all. I told myself it was for the best, that we needed time to heal, to figure out how to pick up the pieces of our lives without each other. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Months later, I ran into Claire at a coffee shop. She was standing in line ahead of me, her hair pulled back and her expression tired but calm. I hesitated, debating whether I should turn and leave before she noticed me. But then she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then, to my surprise, she gave me a small, tentative nod. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Hi," she replied, her tone neutral. I wanted to say so much, to apologize again, to tell her how much I missed her. But I knew that wasn't what she needed. "How's Emma?" I asked instead. "She's fine," Claire said, her gaze softening slightly. "And Liam?" I hesitated, unsure how much she wanted to hear. "I think he's okay. He's been focusing on his art." She nodded, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before she said, "I'm not ready to talk about everything, but maybe someday." "Okay," I said softly, my chest tightening. "Whenever you're ready." I don't regret Liam, not entirely. What we had was real, and it brought something into my life that I didn't realize I'd been missing. But it also came at a cost I wasn't prepared to pay. Claire's tentative words at the coffee shop gave me a sliver of hope that we might rebuild our friendship someday. But I knew it wouldn't be the same. Some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. As for Liam, I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Maybe he'll find someone his own age who can love him without the weight of guilt or secrecy. Maybe I'll find peace in knowing that, for a brief moment, I meant something to him. Life doesn't give us clean endings. It gives us messy, complicated, imperfect moments, and we have to figure out how to live with them. And so I do.